This video shows how to install an Oracle database on top of an EC2 virtual server on Amazon Web Services. I have a blog post on my site that has a workflow and all the commands I'll be utilizing during this video, and I will put the link to that at the bottom of the screen here in a minute. So first thing I'm going to do is click on the EC2 link inside of Amazon Web Services here and go to the instances of EC2 I have. I'm going to go ahead and click Launch Instance, and it brings me to a screen where I can actually choose the Amazon machine image that I want to use. Now, happen to know that there's a number of community AMIs out there that already have the operating system I'm looking for, which in this case is Oracle Enterprise Linux, and I'm just going to use the latest version that's available here. So go ahead and select this instance type. And you can see that it brings me into an area where I get to choose the compute power I'm going to apply against this. And there is a free tier that's available and is actually quite useful for a lot of applications, but in this particular case, with an Oracle database version 12c, the smallest instance I've been able to use without incurring sort of annoying issues is this T2 small instance, which is still very reasonably priced at I think around 2 cents an hour for when it's running. And obviously with these EC2 instances, you don't have to pay for them when they're not running, which is a great thing, especially for development boxes. So this box has one virtual CPU and 2 gigs of memory. So after I select that, I'm going to go ahead and click Next to configure the instance details. I happen to know that I'm going to want to park this in a particular zone because I happen to have the database software stored in the same zone on a volume that I'll attach after we get our instance up and going here. So other than that change, and you could just accept the default if you wanted to for yours, that's about all I need to do right here. The next thing I'm going to do is add storage. So I happen to know that this particular operating system is configured with a 15 gig partition on it, and I've found it's just easier to add additional volumes than it is to try and resize partitions on these machines. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just add a couple of more volumes here. So the first volume I'm going to add is actually going to be for our swap file that we'll need to create on this instance, and I'm going to make this 5 gigs and accept the general purpose SSD here. And then the second one I'm going to use is going to be 10 gigs, and I'm actually going to use this volume to put my data files for my database on. So we're separating the root from the swap file and the data files on the database, and this should give us a pretty flexible instance that we can size with relative ease going forward here. So I've got a total of 25 gigs of storage here, and if I didn't have it already, I would also create an 8 gig volume where I would store the downloaded zip files for the Oracle database that I'll use to install the software. But in this case, I happen to already have that software on a volume that I'll attach at a later time. Next, I'm just going to tag my instance. This is handy if you start firing up a bunch of virtual machines, just remembering what you have. So I'm just going to name this one my EC2 12c database example, so I can remember what it is and not accidentally nuke it when I feel like cleaning the house. Next, I will move along to configuring a security group. You can see this comes with a standard SSH port open so you can connect with PuTTY and stuff like that, I'm going to add a rule, and because I know that this is going to be a database and we will accept the default settings, I'm going to open port 1521, and probably rather unadvisedly, I'm just going to make it open to the whole world. But you can actually come in here and configure these for IP or IP ranges that make this quite a bit more secure, but this database in my case isn't going to be alive for all that long, and I'm not too concerned about people discovering it. So we'll just go ahead and make it open to the whole world here for port 1521, which is the standard communication port the Oracle database uses. So after that, I'm just going to go ahead and review and launch here. Amazon is going to wisely tell me that my security settings aren't that great, and I might want to reconsider them. And then it's also just sort of giving me a little warning here that, hey, you're going to have to pay for this instance, and I'm aware of that, and also in my experience have realized that it's really not very much money at all to stand up a development instance like this. I measure my monthly cost for something like this in the $10 to $15 range. So like I said, really pretty affordable. So I'm just going to accept everything else the way it is here. I'm pretty happy, and I'm going to go ahead and click launch. Now, when this comes up, if you have never created a public key before, you can create a new key pair, which these key pairs are what you use to connect to these instances from tools such as PuTTY or MobaXterm, which I'm going to be using. And basically what it is it gives you a key file to download onto your computer that when you go to connect to this instance later from your desktop, you'll use that key pair as your means for authenticating against this. So I happen to already have a key pair created. If you don't have one, which you probably wouldn't first time through, it's really simple to just go ahead and create one. So I will leave that to you to figure out on your own. And then I'm just going to go ahead and acknowledge, yes, I know all about the key pair I'm going to be using. So now I've clicked the launch button on that instance, and now we can come over here and actually view the instances, and you can see, you know, I've got a few different instances running already that I've been playing around with, and this will actually take about maybe a minute or two to fire up and be available for us to connect to. Now, another interesting thing we can just talk about quickly while we wait for this to come up is one of the great things about Amazon is you can go provision storage much in the same way that we just provisioned a server. So you can see here that it's creating those 3 volumes I asked it for. And those will be attached to the server that we're creating, so we'll have disk space that we can use. And then the volume I plan to attach is right here. This 12C zip file actually contains all the software on it that I want to attach to this instance as well. So you can see that those are all listed as in use now, and we'll be able to utilize this disk space on our instance. So I'm assuming if we go back to our instance now, we can see that it is up and running here, and if we click just on the line that it's on, it gives us our public IP and our public DNS entry that we can use to access this. And you can see all the other things we've kind of told it as we are creating it down here in this little area that gives us our details. Now, in just a minute after this thing is done running some of its self-checks, it will be ready for us to connect to with MobaXterm. All right, now that our instance is up and running here, we're going to just go ahead and attach the other volume to it that has our software. So right here you can see I've got this 12C zip, and go ahead and say attach volume, and then I'm going to go ahead and select our database example instance and say attach. And now that volume that disk will be attached to that server and be accessible by me when I actually get signed into it. So that's just sort of super handy functionality I really like about AWS, is the really flexible way that we can move this disk around and reuse stuff like install files without having to constantly upload and download. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually use a tool called MOBA Xterm. And if you haven't used this before, on my blog I give a link to download it. I highly recommend using it for one, it just being a super handy tool, and also its ability to run graphical user interfaces off of remote servers, which we're going to do to make the database a little bit easier to, database install a little bit easier to deal with. All right, so first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new session, and it's going to be SSH, and you can see it's going to ask me for a remote host. Now, if we jump back into our Amazon console here and we select our instances and select the machine that we're running, we can see this public DNS here. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy that and then switch back to MOBA Xterm and go ahead and drop that in there. And then I am going to specify the username. All these instances by default are configured with a EC2 user. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is check this box to use a private key. And I happen to know what my private key is, and it's the key pair I showed you earlier. And now that we've done that, we should be able to log into this machine. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You can see it has gone ahead and logged me in, and now we're ready to really begin to get started with the tasks that we need to do here. So the very first thing I always do when I log in is change the user of the change the password for the EC2 user, so that I know what it is, and it makes my life easier when I want to switch back and forth between users on the machine, which we'll actually do kind of frequently. The EC2 user has sudo access, which basically means it can execute tasks as if it was the root user or the admin of the machine, and other users such as the Oracle user will not have that kind of access, so it'll be necessary for us to jump back and forth at times when we're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and select a password, which the instance will try to enforce good standards on me, but I'm not going to use them because it's just a development box. And now I've actually switched my password by issuing this sudo, which, act as the root user, password EC2 user, and then I've entered the password at the prompts here. So the next thing we need to do is actually just install a couple of things on this machine that it needs using a handy utility called Yum. And basically Yum is just a thing that installs stuff on your Linux box and handles the part of going out to the internet and getting things for you. So super handy utility. It's going to go ahead and hit enter there. And because I put the -y, it's just going to assume that I want to say yes to its prompts and go ahead and install that software. Next thing I'm going to do is install Perl, because we need this for a couple of utilities. And so it's going to go ahead and do that as well. And now the next thing we're going to end up installing, the Oracle database is sort of painful to get all the pre-configuration done on a machine, but Oracle has been nice and provided a script that will do it all for you. So one more time, we're going to use yum, and all these commands are on the workflow on my blog post here. And we're going to say, go ahead and do everything you need to do to get this server ready for an Oracle database. So going to go ahead and hit that, and this thing's going to grind away on quite a few tasks here. You can see this is it's downloading all the library dependencies the Oracle software has, and it will ultimately create the Oracle user needed to do the install of the Oracle database on this machine. So if we just give it a few seconds here, it'll grind through all its tasks, and now we can see that it's complete. All right, so now that we've accomplished that, what we need to do is actually make sure that all those disks or volumes that we created are actually mounted to the machine. So we're going to use a command here called lsblock. And when we do that, we can see all the disk that is essentially available to us. But when you look up here at this mount point, you can see these three bottom ones that we created don't actually have a mount point, or they're not accessible to us via a directory. So I happen to know that the 5 gigabit disk here and the 10 gigabit disk are unformatted, and we need to format them. But I know the 8 gig disk I have here is formatted, so I want to be careful not to reformat that and erase everything that's on it. So we can see that these names here are XVD, B, C, and F. And so we're going to issue some commands to actually take care of the formatting piece of this. So first we'll do the B1 and go ahead and get this one ready to use, and then we will do the C1. And get that ready to go. And now we're actually going to start making some directories to put some of our stuff in. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a space for swap file we're going to need. And then the next thing I'm going to do is actually mount the 5 gig drive I have here to that directory, which is to say I'm going to make that volume accessible through the file system. So what I've done is just say sudo mount, and I'm referencing this xvdb, and this prefix of dev is something that this command up here just excludes. And then I'm saying I want to give it a directory of swap file 1, which is that directory that we created here. So go ahead and do that, and that directory now has that disk behind it. Now I'm going to do the same thing for a couple of other directories that we need. I happen to know that this instance comes with the UO1 directory that we need for our Oracle software, but there's a couple of pieces under that directory that I want to attach different volumes to. So this first one is this UO1 software, right? I want to actually mount the directory to it, but what I need to do is actually create that directory before I do the mount. So what I'm going to do is, using the makedir command, create a directory for our software, which is living on that volume that I attached. And now I'm actually going to attach that volume to this directory. And so now that that's done, we should actually be able to switch over to that directory and see that the software is on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that to prove that this works. And now if I do the list command, you can see that the database software that I knew was on there is actually still sitting here, and the directory actually of the unzipped software is there as well. So the next thing I want to do is actually make a directory for our data files on the database as well, and then attach the 10 gig disk that we have to it. So go ahead again and make the directory, and let's just clean our screen up here. And now I'm going to attach the 10 gigabyte drive to that directory by using the mount command. And all of these are prefixed with sudo, which just says we want to act as the root user. So now that we've done that, we should be able to do the ls block command again, and we will see that all of these disks are now mounted at the various locations that we've specified and are available for us to use now. So the next thing that we need to do is actually create a swap file. So I want to create a 3 gigabyte swap file in that swap file directory. And I'm going to do it by just issuing this command, which goes ahead and creates a swap file. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And I don't pretend to have come up with this stuff on my own. It's all stuff I've kind of borrowed from the internet on how to do it, and I would highly encourage you, if you don't know how to do something, look around. You'll find generally there's somebody out there who will have done something before and help you out. So we're going to just give this a minute to create that swap file, and then in a second we're going to go ahead and change the ownership of that swap file to make sure that we don't kind of leave a security hole here on our server. All right, so now that is finished creating that 3 gigabyte swap file. We are going to change the ownership of it just to make sure that this belongs to root. And then we are going to change the permissions on this file, and these are all things you don't need to be too concerned about as far as really knowing exactly what's going on, but just trust that these things are necessary for security purposes. And then we're going to make our swap and issue the swap on command to make this available. And now we can see, if we just issue this free command, we can see that the swap file exists and has space available to it right here on this line. So we've gone ahead and created a swap file, which will make our database installer happy when we get to that. Now, the other thing that you want to do when you are mounting disks like this to your instance is you want to make sure that this happens automatically every time that you log into your machine. So we can see up here where we had issued this ls block command, sort of these directories where all of this stuff lives, and there's actually a file called the fstab file that the system reads on startup and uses to mount volumes or attach disks to the instance. So what we are going to do first is just back up that file by issuing this copy command here. Oh, my bad, sorry, copied a bunch of stuff there I didn't mean to. So we're gonna copy our fstab, make a backup of it, just using the cp command to copy it to a backup file that we're going to use. And then we're actually going to use the Vim editor for editing this file. So now when we go to this file, we'll see that there is that sort of root directory that gets mounted to the machine upon startup. And now we're just going to add some other things that we want this machine to automatically do for us when it starts up. So the first thing we're going to do is put our swap file in here. We want that to be attached every time. And then the next thing we're going to do is make sure that our Oracle data file volume is attached at startup, and you can see the syntax here is sort of the volume and then the directory and then a little bit of additional information here. And then next thing we want to do is make sure also that this software is attached upon startup. Although realistically, after we do the install, we could probably get rid of that one. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to save this by hitting escape : WQ, which is write and quit. And oh, I'm sorry, I must not have entered this file the right way. 1 second, we'll just quit and try that again. Oh, yep, I needed to issue the sudo command when I open this because it is a root access file. So I'll do that, and we will just do this one more time. So again, I'm just going to put the swap file, the Oracle data file volume that we're going to use, and the software directory, so that anytime if we were to shut this machine down and turn it back on, we know that this stuff would be attached automatically. So escape : WQ, the write to file, and then everything should be fine. And then if we want to make sure that nothing has gone horribly wrong, we can just refresh the mount here, and everything looks to be hunky-dory. So now that we have all these directories created, we know that everything under that UO1 directory structure needs to belong to our Oracle user, which was created as a part of running that 12c pre-install script we did a little bit earlier here. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the owner to the Oracle user and group of all these structures to make sure that everything is okay. And now that we've done that, we know our Oracle user owns all the directories it needs to, which means it will have their permissions to read and write and do the things it needs to install the software. Now, the next thing we need to do to sort of make sure that we're actually able to connect to this database later is access our host file and make sure that we put the host name in it. So if you type the command host name, the machine will tell you what its name is, and in the case of these Amazon instances, it's really just its IP address appended in the way that you see here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. And then if you type in sudo for root user, and we use our Vim editor, and we go to the etc directory and open this host file, we'll see that this file is set up to handle localhost, right? So this machine is all prepared to talk to itself, and what we need to do is actually put this host name in here on this line as well to facilitate communication on the instance, so that it knows how to handle internal routing when the database and listener and all that stuff are up and going. So we're going to go ahead and save that change by doing the :WQ command again. And now we have changed our host file. We're pretty much ready to get started with our install, but we have just a couple more things we need to accomplish. So the other thing we want to do is change the password on the Oracle user. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that using really bad security practice so I don't forget my username. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend taking this approach with anything you're actually concerned about. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to switch users from the EC2 user we've been using over to this Oracle user. So the way that we do that is we actually say switch user, or SU Oracle. It'll ask for our password, which we just changed, and now you can see it switched me over to the Oracle user. So I want to switch to the Oracle user's home directory, and if I just do this CD space tilde, that takes me to the Oracle home. If I do the list command or the present working directory command, you can see I'm in the Oracle home. So the next thing I need to do is, in order for me to be able to connect remotely with the Oracle user, I am going to add the things that it needs to facilitate this type of stuff. So we're creating this directory, and all this information is out on Amazon's site, and I put the links to this on my blog post as well as all these commands. So we're just going to go through and create a directory and then a key file that corresponds with that public key that we were using earlier. And then we are going to set the permissions on this file to the permissions that Amazon recommends for us. And then I'm actually going to use this command, which goes in ahead and puts the key value into this authorized key file that we've created. So all I'm doing here is utilizing git command to get the open key and pipe it into our file. So I'll go ahead and do that, and that's complete. And now at this point I ought to be able to log out of my instance and log back in as the Oracle user, which will be especially handy if you need to upload software and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just log out here by closing this window. And now I'm going to edit this session, and I'm going to switch from the EC2 user to the Oracle user. And double click to connect. We should see that we are able to connect to the box here. And then if we were to take a look at our directory structure here, if we go up a couple spots, at this point, if I wanted to upload a bunch of database software, which the first time I ever did this I would have, I could actually just go into this software directory and drag and drop zip files from my desktop. So if that's what you're going to do, then you can expect this process to probably take 15 or 20 minutes. These files I think are around a couple of gigs each, all told. So I've already suffered this pain. These files are ready to go for us here. So we're actually just going to get after installing the software. Now I've got the sort of task in my list of things to do on my blog post that says, hey, upload the zip files and unzip them. I'm going to kind of assume that you can handle this piece, but the commands are on my blog post if you need them. So now what we're going to do is actually get about doing the install. So I'm going to change directories here to the U01 software database directory, and if I were to list this, I can see that the installer is in here, and on Linux I just do /run installer, and because I'm using MobaXterm here, when I hit this I'll actually get a graphical user interface. Now I'll warn you, doing a GUI through MobaXterm like this will be maddeningly slow, but for the sake of demonstration here, I wanted to make it easy to do the install. So this will look just as if you were installing it on your desktop, but it's going to be quite a bit slower than we would like it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to do some of its pre-checks, and we'll be happy about that, and then it should fire up the installer here on my desktop in just a second. And this actually takes about probably 15-30 seconds to fire up. And you can see here, I'll just drag it over on the screen, it's painting the window here, and in another 15 or 20 seconds we'll actually get everything up. Now It is possible to use a response file, which is just a file that you use to do installations, which answers all the questions that this dialog is going to ask you. And if you know what that is and how to use it, then you can probably stop right here and you'll be mostly ready to go. Otherwise, if you want to see how we install this, I'll actually walk you through the process of running the installer here. And again, just caution you that this Xterm viewer is going to be awfully slow as we go through this, but it will function and work. You just have to be patient with it. So here I'm just going to go ahead and click the box to say that I don't want to receive security updates. And then it's going to pop another dialog box that asks me if I'm really truly sure. And I will edit out some of the wait times here, but know that this can be 15-20 seconds a piece on some of this stuff. Okay, we can see that this is actually finally popped up for us here, so I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. And click next. All right, now we can see after waiting again, 15-30 seconds in between screens here, that we're ready to create and configure a database. So I'm going to go ahead and click next again. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead for this purposes, just select the desktop class. And now we can see that it's going to put things in the default directories, and you can see our database file location is in that Aura data spot that we wanted. We just need to give a password for the standard instance name here. And in all cases, I'm going to just take the defaults as we go through this. If you care to change any of these things for your own reason, you're certainly welcome to. And being as this is a 12C instance, I'm actually going to go ahead and create a container database, because in a companion post to this one, we will deploy Apex on a container database. So we're definitely going to want this. All right, and again, we're just going to continue to accept the defaults on the installer screen. And at this point, we can see that it is beginning to do the normal task that the installer does to create a database. And we will get our final screen for approving the creation of our database here. And we actually have the option to save a response file. So if in the future you wanted to create databases and not have to sort of suffer through this piece on your instance, you could actually use one of these response files. But we're not going to concern ourselves with that right now, and I'm just going to go ahead and click install. Here we can see all the tasks that the software is going to perform, and we will expect all of these to complete without issue. And when it gets to this execute root scripts, we'll actually have something else that we need to do here. Now our installer has gotten to the point where it needs us to actually do a couple of tasks on the operating system. And what you need to be careful about here is we actually want to open a new session so as not to interrupt our installer session here. So what I'm actually going to do is open an entirely different version of MOBA Xterm by just selecting to run the executable again. So, and I'll bring that over here, and then we are going to connect to our Amazon instance that we have. But this time I'm actually going to connect as the EC2 user. All right, so double click that, and now connecting with a separate instance, like I said here. You can see that we're logged in as our EC2 user. So now we're going to actually execute the root scripts that the installer wants us to. We can see them right here. And I also have these commands available for you on the blog post. So I'm going to go ahead and executing these with the sudo option, which means do as root. Go ahead and execute these. So first we'll do this one, and then we will do the second one. And I'm just going to go ahead and accept the default there, and that completes that piece of the task. So we can pull that window out of the way and then say OK, telling the installer that we're ready to get moving again. And now it will go about the tasks of doing the configuration so the database can communicate and also then create a database for us. So we can see the database configuration assistant is going about the processes of creating a database for us, and we will just patiently wait while this completes. All right, well, after a couple of minutes here, our database configuration assistant has completed and given us the standard information it always gives you at the end here. Probably a good idea to maybe snap some screenshots of this type of information just so you remember it. But at this point, you can see that everything was successful. We can say OK to the database configuration assistant, and we'll see that our installer has successfully installed our Oracle database. And at this point, there's really only 2 more tasks we have to do to make it so that you can connect to this database from anywhere. But on our instance right here, if we click close, we will find that our database is available to us on our local machine here. So in order to prove that, I'm just going to type the /space aura env command to make sure that my database parameters are set. I know the instance name in this case is ORCL, and now I should just be able to connect to this instance with SQL Plus. And because I am on the machine, all I need to do is kind of tell it how I want to connect, and we can see that our database is up and running here, which is great. But right now, if you tried to connect remotely to this machine, it wouldn't work because of the last thing that we need to do. So the last thing we need to do here is actually change our TNS names and listener aura. So if you switch to the UO1 directory here and you search for the tnsnames.aura using the find command, you'll find the directory that this thing is located. These files are, or at least the first file is located. So I'm going to go ahead and click or enter the hostname command again, and then just copy this. But before I do that, I'm going to want to go to this TNS names file here. So I'm just going to type in the VI command using that path it gave me, and you can see here that we've got this local host value in here, and that's not good, is about all I can tell you there. So I'm going to go back and copy this host name here, and then I'm going to re-enter that command by just hitting the up arrow and hit I to edit this, and I'm going to come down here and paste this host name in place of this local host value that's in here. Okay, and I'm going to save that. And now I need to do the same thing to the listener.aura file. and I just happen to know where that is, but the find command is in there as well, and all this stuff is on my blog post. So we can see we have the same problem here. I'm going to go back and copy our host name one more time. Again, hit the up arrow to go back to the listener, I to edit, come down to the local host, and replace this with the actual host name of our machine. So now that I've done that, I will write the file by ;wq, and we should be pretty much prepared to go, but we do need to restart our listener and our database here. So the listener control is just lsnrctl, and we're just going to tell the listener to stop, and it will tell us okay, no problem. And then I'm going to connect to the database one more time using SQL Plus as sysdba, and I am going to tell this database to shut down, and we'll just tell it immediately even though it's not really necessary. And so in just a second here, this database instance will shut itself down, and then we will start it and the listener back up. And now that it's stopped, I'm just going to say startup. And the database will spring to life for us, understanding the new parameters that are, or values that are in those Aura files. Now I will exit SQL Plus. We will start the listener back up, and it is happy and ready to go. And then if we check the status here, we'll see that it's not supporting any services, probably because I did things a little bit out of order there. But if we go back to SQL Plus here, or the database would take care of this, but I'm just going to be anal about it to make sure it's running. We can all actually tell the system to register itself with the listener by doing the alter system register. And now if we exit SQL Plus and we check our status one more time, we can see that the instances are up and going on our database. So now, just to sort of to prove out what is going on here, we can actually grab SQL Developer. So I'm going to grab SQL Developer from my desktop here. This is running on my local machine, and actually create a new connection here. So I can just call this example EC2, and then I'm going to actually go back to my Amazon console where I can see the database server we got here. I'm going to grab that public DNS name one more time, and then we will drop that in as the host name. I'm going to log in as sys to this instance. I will save the password, and then I know the SID is ORCL. And now, if we've done everything right with the database we've just created, and selecting the sysdba role here because we're connecting assist, should be able to test this connection, and we've had success. We're able to connect to it. So if I go ahead and click connect at this point, I will log into that database instance that we just created, and in the spirit of making sure it works, we can do a select star from Dual, and our EC2 12c database instance is alive and well and talking to us on the internet. So that is the conclusion of this post and this video on how to create an EC2 instance database. Next, I'm going to show you how to install the Oracle REST Data Services listener on a separate EC2 instance and stand up a Apex instance, which then you can connect to your database and also access via the internet. So please check that post out as well.